They thought firing me meant erasing me. What they didn't know was buried in paragraph 14, subsection C of a contract they never fully read. By the time their lawyer figured it out, I was already gone. I never expected the end to come on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were quiet. Spreadsheet days. Days when the fluorescent lights hummed slightly louder than the people. I was sipping burnt office coffee in conference room C when the notification popped up. Meeting with CEO, 15 minutes. No subject, no context, just a digital tap on the shoulder. I stared at it for a second too long, then closed the tab, heart rate steady. I'd been here long enough to know. The truly dangerous meetings never came with a warning. They came with catered lunch and fake smiles. This felt surgical. 12 minutes later, I stepped into the corner office. Glass walls, cold air, and not even a gesture to sit. "Thanks for coming," he said, not meaning it. He didn't look up from his laptop. This was Liam Hayward, CEO, charismatic in public, spreadsheet sharp in private, and allergic to long-term memory when it came to promises made to employees. "I'll be direct. We're restructuring. Your position has been evaluated as redundant." The word hung in the air like static. Redundant, not underperforming, not problematic, just disposable. I didn't blink. I'd seen others cry, protest, plead, but I'd also read the fine print they hadn't. "Effective immediately?" I asked, tone neutral. He nodded once, as if sealing a fate. "Of course, you'll receive your standard severance. I'll need that in writing," I interrupted, "along with the termination packet." His eyes flicked up then, the first crack in the ice. The assistant outside slid a manila envelope onto the table without a word. I reached for it calmly, almost too calmly, because while he'd been planning to erase me, I'd been waiting for this exact moment. Paragraph 14, subsection C of my employment agreement wasn't just legal jargon. It was a trigger. A small clause called the acceleration clause, buried beneath pages of boilerplate language. It stated, if employment is terminated without cause within 30 days prior to a scheduled vesting event, all unvested equity shall accelerate and become immediately exercisable. My vesting date? Friday, 3 days away, and now it was mine. All of it. A multi-million-dollar stock package they tried to cut short had just been triggered. By them. I left the office without a word, the manila envelope under my arm and the elevator door closing between me and the past 7 years. They thought they'd taken something from me, but what they'd really done was sign the release. I reached my car, pulled out my phone, and opened my inbox. Subject, Golden Parachute Notice Initiation Required. Sender, Legal Compliance at brightcore.tech. I smiled, but the best part? They didn't even know yet. Some mistakes cost a company millions, and you won't believe how long it took them to realize it. The first email arrived before I even reached my apartment. I hadn't taken off my coat yet. The city outside my window was gray and busy, unaware that somewhere between the elevator ride and my front door, a financial avalanche had already begun. Subject, option activation email. Immediate confirmation required. From equity operations at brightcore.tech. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I set my bag down, poured a glass of water, and stood there listening to the silence. The kind of silence that only comes after a decision you didn't fight, but won. When I finally tapped the screen, the language was clinical, almost polite. Due to the recent change in employment status, this message serves as formal notification that all outstanding options have entered accelerated vesting, effective immediately. Accelerated. That word again. They loved it when it applied to growth, to revenue, to exit strategies. They hated it when it applied to me. 2 paragraphs later, the number appeared, not written out, just digits, clean and undeniable. Evaluation calculated at last quarter's price. I exhaled slowly. They had fired me 3 days too early, and now the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, without emotion, without mercy. Another email followed within minutes, then another. Legal. HR compliance, different departments, same tone, careful, measured. The digital equivalent of people lowering their voices when they realize they're standing on thin ice. By the 4th email, I noticed something else. They weren't explaining anything. They were asking. One message stood out, marked high priority. We'd like to schedule a brief call to clarify next steps regarding your equity status. Clarify. I smiled again, because there was nothing to clarify. The contract was clear. The timestamps were clear. Their signatures were clear. What wasn't clear, at least not to them yet, was how badly they'd miscalculated the order of operations. An hour later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. 5 minutes after that, another call. Different number. Still nothing. Then came the voicemail. Calm, almost friendly. Hi, this is Martin from Legal. Just wanted to make sure you received the option activation email. There may have been some overlap in timing we'd like to review. Overlap. That was a new one. I let the voicemail end, then archived it without replying. Because while they were scrambling internally, another process had already started. The golden parachute notice wasn't just a courtesy, it was automated. Once triggered, it notified an external trustee responsible for handling payouts under executive and senior staff agreements. A system outside their control, a system that didn't take calls. I opened my laptop and logged into the portal I'd only glanced at once before, years ago, when I signed everything without thinking I'd ever need it. There it was. Status. Processing. Estimated completion. Pending final confirmation. No button to cancel. No undo. Downstairs, a car horn echoed. Somewhere, someone laughed. And somewhere inside Brightcore's glass tower, someone had just realized that firing me hadn't closed a door. It had opened a vault. They thought the worst was over. What happened next sent their legal team into full panic mode. Ever seen a CEO trigger $1 million mistake with one meeting? If you're hooked, drop a comment and stick around. It only gets better from here. By Wednesday morning, they weren't calling anymore. They were sending people. At 8:12 a.m., a sleek black town car pulled up in front of my building. Tinted windows, engine running, the kind of ride reserved for board members, not recently terminated employees. The intercom buzzed. "This is Jacob, your driver. I've been asked to bring you to Brightcore HQ for a conversation. At your convenience, of course." Of course. The message was soft, but the meaning was hard. They didn't want to email anymore. Too traceable, too dangerous. They wanted me in a room. Off the record, face to face, preferably without a paper trail. I didn't go. Instead, I watched the car idling from my window, then returned to my laptop. The portal still showed status processing, but a new tab had appeared. Final confirmation step. Acknowledgement of vesting event. Just one checkbox. No signature. No document to upload. It felt too easy. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked. A small spinning wheel. Then, your equity activation is now complete. Funds disbursement begins within 3 to 5 business days. That was it. No trumpet sound, no celebration, just silence. And a tiny, life-changing confirmation email. Minutes later, my phone vibrated again. Not a call this time, but a text. Unknown number. Please, we need to discuss this in person. It wasn't supposed to go this way. I stared at the screen, then blocked the number. Because the truth was, it was supposed to go this way. Just not for them. Back at HQ, they were unraveling. You could hear it in the emails from junior staff, tiptoeing around phrases like unexpected departure and equity adjustments. You could see it in LinkedIn updates shifting roles overnight, in nervous DMs from colleagues who wrote, "Hey, is it true? Did you really win?" But it wasn't about winning. It was about reading, about paying attention when no one else was, about knowing that subsection C wasn't just legal filler, it was leverage. And the best part? It had never been a secret. It was all in the contract they wrote. Sometime after lunch, the final attempt came, a calendar invite. Urgent. Clarification, meeting with CEO plus legal. Location. Zoom time. 3:30 p.m., a classic move. They couldn't force me into the building, so they came for the next best thing. Zoom, where they could record the call, steer the conversation, control the narrative. I declined the invite. Then, to be sure, I opened Zoom, navigated to settings, and deleted my entire meeting history. Logged out. Uninstalled. They could chase me with cars, lawyers, and cold voices behind warm words. But they couldn't reach me anymore. I was no longer in their system. I was out. On Thursday, the silence shifted. Not the absence of noise, but the weight of it. like the air in a boardroom before someone gets fired, or the stillness in an inbox before a legal disaster breaks loose. I woke up to no calls, no emails, no knocks on the door. Instead, there was a courier notification from a firm I didn't recognize. Delivery scheduled. 2:15 p.m. signature required. The firm's name rang a distant bell. They handled executive severance packages for Brightcore's senior leadership, except I was no longer an executive. I wasn't even employed. At exactly 2:15, the knock came. A young man in a navy jacket, tablet in hand, box in the other. "Signature?" he asked, not even looking me in the eye. I signed. Inside the box, a glossy black binder and a sealed envelope with my name embossed in silver. Corporate apology by design. The letter inside was written in that careful HR dialect, distant but vaguely warm. Dear name, we understand there has been confusion surrounding the recent triggering of your equity clause. As a valued former employee, we would like to offer a structured resolution in alignment with our shared history and mutual respect. Structured resolution. A beautiful way to say, please give the money back. But they weren't asking. They were hoping I'd panic, hoping the formality would rattle me, that I'd flinch at the implied threat, lawsuits, audits, reputational whispers. They didn't know I'd already spoken to a lawyer, not just any lawyer, the one who wrote the clause for my contract back when Brightcore needed me badly enough to say yes to anything, back when they weren't careful. He had laughed when I showed him the emails. Let them try, he'd said. If they push, we subpoena the internal chat logs, the time-stamped option activation email, and the golden parachute notice. That clause is bulletproof. They signed it. You clicked it. It's done. Still, I read the entire binder 3 times. Pages of polite language wrapped around a single plea, please undo this. Buried in the middle was a new clause they were offering, a post-exit compliance agreement. If I signed, I would agree to a good faith review of the equity transaction in collaboration with executive counsel. Translation: give them a way to slow this down or scare me into arbitration. I didn't sign. Instead, I drafted a 3-line reply. Received your package, no action required on my end. The terms executed were consistent with the agreement you provided and approved. No emotion, no explanation, just facts. Then I shut the binder and placed it in the back of my closet, next to my old badge and a single sticky note I'd saved from my last team meeting. It read, "Don't forget, your work speaks louder than your title." They had taken the title. But my work? It had just spoken louder than ever. Friday arrived like an echo of the day they should have waited for. My original vesting date, the day they tried to cut off, thinking it would save them money, control, face. Instead, it marked the completion of their most expensive mistake. At 9:01 a.m., my inbox dinged with a subject line so clean, so quiet, it felt surgical. Subject, confirmation of equity payout. Final disbursement notice. I clicked it slowly. There it was. The full breakdown, line by line, option by option, the valuation, the bonus triggers, the net settlement. Every cent calculated against a system they'd built for people like them, not for people like me. And the final number? It had grown. Because they hadn't just fired me early, they'd triggered other clauses in the process. Small ones. Hidden ones. The kind you only notice if you read every option activation email with a lawyer sitting next to you. Clause 9.3, Retaliation Protection Acceleration. Clause 12.4, Cap table adjustments in absence of malfeasance. Together, those two added another 6 figures to the payout. No calls came that morning. Instead, I received a new kind of email from a private wealth advisor at a firm I'd never contacted. Apparently, Brightcore's legal had flagged my payout internally to finance. Finance had flagged it to their external advisors, and now those advisors were trying to assist me, as if I were confused, overwhelmed, or grateful. But I wasn't confused. I was focused. By 11 a.m., I'd closed every professional account tied to my old work email, logged out of every productivity tool, disabled Slack, removed Zoom, scrubbed Google Drive of anything personal. But one thing I did keep, a folder labeled CEO Termination System Logs. Inside it were 4 screenshots, one from the meeting invite timestamp, one from the internal acceleration clause confirmation, one from the digital signature on my employment agreement, and one, just one, from the CEO himself, dated a week before he let me go. Let's push her out before Friday. If legal asks, say it's about performance, it'll save us $1.2 million. Performance. The word still made me laugh, because if performance was what they were measuring, they'd just seen the best performance of my entire career. I saved the screenshots, encrypted the folder, and backed it up to 2 separate drives. Not out of spite, out of principle. Because in companies like Brightcore, memory is selective, but logs aren't. And when someone inevitably asked, "How did this happen?" I wanted to be ready, not to fight. Just to show them how a whisper became a landslide. I hadn't expected the silence to last, but it did. All through the weekend, nothing came. Not a single email, call, or knock. The town car never returned. The polite legal language vanished. It was as if the entire company had exhaled and then held its breath. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't even tell my closest friends. Instead, I walked for hours through neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years, past coffee shops I used to rush past on the way to meetings that now felt like someone else's problem. There was something about reclaiming time, not just minutes or hours, but the kind of time that once belonged to a version of me who thought job titles meant safety. That version was gone. Late Sunday night, an email slipped through. No subject line, just a sender I didn't recognize. I clicked. "We know you have the logs. We hope you won't use them. No hard feelings. Let's move on." There it was. No threats, no denials, just quiet recognition. They knew, and now they knew I knew. I reread the message once, then deleted it. Because I didn't need leverage. I didn't need revenge. I had the only thing that ever really mattered in a company like that. Documentation, timestamps, contracts, paper trails, not noise, proof. And proof doesn't shout. It waits. Monday morning, I got one final notification. A system ping from an old shared folder marked CEO, Executive Review. Someone had forgotten to remove my access. Inside, a PDF titled Q1 Crisis Strategy, Legal Risk Assessment. Page 4. We recommend immediate NDA revisions across leadership tiers. Risk level, high incident summary, equity vesting error due to premature termination, potential precedent case. They didn't mention my name. They didn't have to. I closed the file and signed out for the last time. This time, I didn't uninstall the software. I left it there, just to remind myself. Not of them, but of the moment they taught me the difference between silence and power. Some exits echo louder than any entrance. By Tuesday, my name had vanished from the company's org chart. My photo was gone from the Our Leaders page. Even internal Slack channels had replaced past mentions with former employee, a digital erasure. Standard protocol, they'd say, but the timing wasn't standard. Because alongside my vanishing act, something else began to ripple. Questions. Quiet ones, from inside. I wasn't the only one who'd read her contract, and I certainly wasn't the only one who had noticed the golden parachute notice in their inbox. An old colleague reached out on Signal. No greeting, just a sentence. "I think I have the same clause you used." I didn't respond. Not yet. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the system waking up to its own design flaws, the kind they never thought we'd study, the kind buried in long PDFs no one was supposed to actually read, but we had read them. Every clause, every timestamp, every option activation email they once copy-pasted from templates written by someone 2 regimes ago. Another message came in. "Can you send me your lawyer's info?" Quietly. "This one," I answered. By Thursday, whispers turned into quiet turbulence. I heard from an HR friend, the one who'd slipped me that manila envelope with a tight jaw and tired eyes. They're reviewing every executive contract now. Someone in legal lost sleep. Someone else might lose their job. It wasn't personal. It was structural. A tower built on speed, ego, and assumption. They moved fast. They scaled faster. But they never checked the foundations. And in those cracks, people like me had left seeds, clauses, protections, legal language written with ink and patience. Now those seeds were sprouting, one clause at a time. On Friday, a headline caught my eye. Tech blog, small but sharp. Brightcore exec departure sparks legal questions over equity triggers. Anonymous sources suggest unusual payout event may lead to internal review. I read it twice. It didn't name me, but it might as well have. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a footnote that changes the narrative, a contract that flips the ending, a sentence someone forgot they signed until it cost them everything. And as I watched the story spread, I felt no anger, just clarity. They'd built an empire on attention, and now they were losing it to a clause they drafted themselves. By the following week, I was no longer the story, but the template. HR departments at 3 other firms reached out through back channels, not to recruit me, not to warn me, just curious. One message stood out. Hypothetically, how enforceable is an acceleration clause if the board never reviewed the firing? That word again, hypothetically. The corporate way of saying, we're terrified this could happen here too. At Brightcore, internal activity spiked. I knew from metadata. Access logs shifted. Documents were opened at odd hours. Subsection C of multiple contracts was now a hot item. Flagged, annotated, passed between legal, finance, and HR like a live wire. And through all of this, no one said a word publicly. They couldn't. Not without admitting that a single avoidable decision had opened the vault for someone they meant to delete. I kept my distance, but others didn't. One VP still at the company DM'd me from a burner LinkedIn account, a woman I'd mentored during her chaotic onboarding years ago. You were right. They fired you to send a message. It sent the wrong one. What followed was an internal memo screenshot, redacted, shaky, but enough. Subject: Retroactive Policy Review, Executive Equity Protocols Directive. Ensure all terminations involving upcoming vesting are now subject to board-level override. Too late. They were locking the door after the storm had walked out with the safe. The best part? It wasn't just about the money. It was about precedent. Because now, somewhere in the HR playbooks of 3 other companies, a new question had emerged at the bottom of every termination checklist. Have we reviewed the acceleration clause? They'd never forget it again. But for me, the echo was fading. I didn't want fame or revenge. I wanted space. So I took it. I booked a small Airbnb by the coast. No Wi-Fi, no Zoom, no Slack, just long mornings, black coffee, and quiet. The kind you can only enjoy after surviving corporate fire. And on the 3rd day, I did something small, almost sacred. I deleted the folder labeled Brightcore, not to forget, but because I didn't need it anymore. Everything they tried to erase had already made its mark, not in headlines, not in lawsuits, but in fear. Fear has a sound in the corporate world. It's not shouting, not even whispers. It's the click of a lock on a shared folder, the sudden access denied when you open a file you've always had. It's the silence after someone like me leaves, and the questions no one dares to ask out loud. By the time I returned from the coast, my name had turned into a reference point. I wasn't a scandal. I was a cautionary tale. One junior executive, now freelancing on the side, reached out anonymously. They're calling it doing a Clause 14. Everyone's terrified of it, even the CEO. I stared at the message longer than I meant to, because that clause, that tiny block of legal fine print, was never meant to be a weapon. It was a seatbelt, a safety net. I didn't write it to get rich. I signed it to survive. But survival, it turns out, is louder than ambition. The next morning, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a thick envelope marked, "For your records." Inside that, a flash drive. No label. I scanned it carefully. Offline. One folder. CEO Zoom logs, internal meeting clips, Curiosity 1. The videos were time-stamped, recorded in secret. Someone in the executive loop had captured moments that weren't supposed to exist, including the meeting where they planned my exit. If she takes this public, we'll have a brand problem. Not a legal one. Worse, a cultural one. Can we pressure her to sign an NDA retroactively? No, she has the logs. They had known. From day one. And someone on the inside had started documenting the fallout. Not for justice, not for ethics, but for insurance. Everyone in that room had smiled at me at some point. wished me happy birthday, asked for favors, and now they were afraid of what I might say. Except I wasn't going to say anything. The truth didn't need a press release. It had already reshaped the walls they worked in, quietly, permanently. By Friday, I sent one last message to the lawyer who'd helped me. Just 6 words. Time to take your name off it. He replied with a thumbs up. The clause would be retired now. Rewritten, sealed, hidden. They would pretend it never existed. But the echo would stay. Because fear is like code in a system. Once it's there, you never really delete it. You just build around it, praying no one triggers it again. It took me exactly 7 days to realize I no longer checked the clock. Not in the morning, not before lunch, not in the quiet panic before a calendar invite. Time, once carved into 15-minute blocks and status syncs, now moved differently, freely. I wasn't running, I was watching. From a distance, Brightcore continued to shine, at least on the surface. They made new hires, posted polished videos about culture reinvention and learning from within. The CEO even published a Medium post about ethical leadership in a fast-moving world. Nowhere in the article was the word mistake, but I recognized the language. It was the same tone we used in PR drafts when something had quietly gone wrong. But no one could afford to admit it. I was never mentioned. Not in meetings, not in memos, but I saw the signs. A change in their onboarding playbook, now with a section on executive exit protocols. A revised termination checklist, leaked quietly by a former colleague, now asking 3 things before any firing. Is there a pending vesting date? Have all clauses been reviewed by legal and compliance? Has the board approved this action in writing? I printed it out and pinned it to my kitchen wall. Not as a trophy, as proof that systems remember, even when people try to forget. One morning, I walked past a coffee shop near the old office, the kind of place where ideas were once pitched between sips of oat milk lattes and launch anxiety. I spotted someone, a familiar silhouette hunched over a laptop, stress in their shoulders, phone buzzing beside their coffee. Liam, the CEO. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in energy. Like a man carrying weight that didn't show on scales. Our eyes met for just a second. Recognition flickered, but he didn't nod. He didn't wave. He looked away. And that, more than any payout, clause, or clause rewrite, was the moment I knew it was over. Not just for me, for him. Because the worst thing you can do to someone who thrives on power is survive their absence. I walked past the cafe. No hesitation, no turning back. The city moved, emails dinged, people called, cars waited, and I kept walking, free.